possible. When I saw the private footage leak from Martha's Vineyard last Tuesday, I knew something fundamental had shifted in American politics forever. But what I witnessed wasn't just another politician having a bad day. What I saw was the exact moment Barack Obama realized that everything he built over 8 years was crumbling faster than he ever imagined possible. The source of this footage? Someone Obama trusted completely. A longtime advisor who couldn't stomach watching the destruction unfold in silence anymore. This wasn't a security breach or a hostile leak. This was someone inside Obama's inner circle who felt the American people deserved to see what was happening behind those carefully maintained public facades. And what they captured on camera wasn't just political disappointment, it was something far more personal and devastating. For the first time since entering public life, Obama looked genuinely confused about how the system actually works. The man who had spent years lecturing others about constitutional law was discovering that his understanding was far more limited than he had ever admitted, even to himself. Picture this: the man who once commanded global stages, who spoke with the confidence of someone who believed history would vindicate every decision, sitting alone in his study, staring at documents that revealed Trump's most devastating policy reversal yet. And what broke him wasn't the policy itself. It was the realization that he had been outmaneuvered by someone he consistently underestimated. You see, most people think they understand what happened this Christmas week. They think it's just another political dispute over administrative guidance. But they're missing the deeper story. They're missing the psychological warfare that's been playing out behind closed doors since Trump returned to office. And they're definitely missing why Obama, for the first time in his political career, looked genuinely defeated. The document that shattered Obama's composure wasn't classified, it wasn't secret, it was sitting right there in the Federal Register for anyone to read. But sometimes the most devastating blows come from the most obvious places. Trump's team had quietly reversed a series of executive orders that Obama considered his greatest administrative achievements. Not the flashy stuff that makes headlines, the deep bureaucratic architecture that was supposed to outlast any single presidency. I've been studying political power for decades, and I can tell you this: nothing terrifies a former president more than watching their legacy evaporate in real time. Obama spent months after leaving office carefully constructing what he called the administrative state insurance policy. Hundreds of regulations, guidance documents, and bureaucratic interpretations designed to make his vision permanent, regardless of who occupied the Oval Office next. But here's what Obama never anticipated. Trump didn't just reverse these policies. He did something far more sophisticated. He used Obama's own legal frameworks against him. Every regulation Obama embedded in the federal bureaucracy, Trump found a way to flip using the exact same statutory authorities. It was constitutional jujitsu of the highest order. The breaking point came when Obama realized that his carefully crafted immigration guidance, his environmental regulatory schemes, his social welfare expansions, all of it, was being systematically dismantled using the very legal theories Obama himself had championed when he needed to bypass Congress. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that even Obama's closest advisors couldn't find a way to spin it. What made this moment even more devastating was the timing. Christmas week. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. While families gathered to celebrate, Obama sat in his study confronting the reality that his political legacy was experiencing something close to a resurrection in reverse. Everything he thought was permanent was proving to be as fragile as he once claimed his predecessors' policies were. But the true genius of Trump's approach wasn't just the reversal of policies. It was the methodical exposure of how those policies were implemented in the first place. Each administrative change came with detailed documentation showing exactly how Obama's team had bent statutory language, redefined congressional intent, and stretched executive authority beyond recognition. Trump wasn't just governing differently, he was teaching a masterclass in constitutional limits. I watched Obama's inner circle scramble to respond, and what struck me was their complete inability to articulate a defense that didn't sound hypocritical. For 8 years, they had insisted that aggressive executive action was necessary when Congress failed to act. Now they were arguing that Trump's aggressive executive action was somehow illegitimate, even when it followed the exact same constitutional logic they had pioneered. The psychological pressure was immense. Obama had spent years presenting himself as the adult in the room, the constitutional law professor who understood the system better than anyone else. But Trump was demonstrating that Obama's understanding was actually quite shallow. Worse, he was doing it using Obama's own precedents as justification. What finally broke Obama's composure was a conversation with his legal team about potential responses. They explained with evident discomfort that challenging Trump's actions would require them to argue that their own previous actions had been unconstitutional. It was a legal checkmate that left the former president staring at walls for hours. The footage I mentioned earlier showed Obama in his private study, surrounded by binders full of administrative guidance that his team had spent years crafting. Documents that were supposed to represent permanent change, regardless of electoral outcomes. And there he was, methodically reading through Trump's reversals, watching decades of careful bureaucratic construction disappear with the stroke of a pen. But this story goes deeper than one man's political defeat. What we're witnessing is the exposure of a governing philosophy that promised transformation through administrative complexity. Obama's team believed they could engineer permanent change by making their policies so intricate, so embedded in bureaucratic procedure that future presidents wouldn't dare unravel them. They were wrong. Trump proved that complexity is actually vulnerability. Every elaborate regulatory scheme Obama created provided multiple pressure points for reversal. Every carefully worded guidance document contained language that could be reinterpreted. Every bureaucratic innovation could be bureaucratically undone. The Christmas breakdown wasn't just about policy. It was about the realization that Obama's entire approach to presidential power had been fundamentally flawed. He had confused complexity with durability, bureaucratic sophistication with political staying power, and now he was watching Trump demonstrate that the simplest approach, following actual statutory language, was far more resilient than any administrative innovation. But here's what made the scene even more heartbreaking to watch. Obama kept reaching for his phone as if to call someone who could explain how this was happening. But who could he call? His former White House staff were powerless. His Supreme Court appointees were bound by law, not loyalty. His media allies couldn't spin away constitutional reality. For the first time in his adult life, Obama was completely alone with the consequences of his own decisions. I've seen many politicians face defeat, but this was different. This was a man watching his intellectual pride crumble in real time. Obama had always believed that his Harvard Law Review credentials made him uniquely qualified to understand constitutional limits. But Trump was demonstrating that street-smart practicality often beats academic theory when it comes to wielding actual power. What makes this moment historically significant is not just the reversal of policies, but the methodical demonstration that Obama's constitutional theories were internally contradictory. If executive authority is broad enough to justify his own actions, then it's broad enough to justify their reversal. If administrative agencies can reinterpret congressional intent to advance progressive goals, then they can reinterpret it to advance conservative ones. Obama spent years arguing that his policies represented moral progress that should transcend normal political cycles. But Trump's systematic reversals have exposed the uncomfortable truth that moral claims don't create constitutional authority. Administrative guidance doesn't become sacred text just because it serves preferred political outcomes. The breakdown I witnessed wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was the quiet despair of someone realizing that their fundamental assumptions about power, law, and political permanence were completely wrong. Obama had built his legacy on sand and called it bedrock. Now the tide was coming in. And perhaps most devastatingly, Obama understood that his team's response options were impossibly limited. They could sue, but that would require arguing against their own legal theories. They could criticize, but that would invite comparisons to their own controversial actions. They could mobilize political opposition, but that would confirm that their policies were always more political than constitutional. So there he sat on Christmas week, confronting the reality that the administrative state he had so carefully constructed was not a permanent achievement, but a temporary political arrangement. And the man he had consistently dismissed as unworthy of serious consideration had just taught him a lesson in constitutional governance that no law school had ever provided. This is why the footage matters. It captures the exact moment when Obama realized that his legacy wasn't being attacked by an inferior mind, but systematically dismantled by someone who understood the system's vulnerabilities better than Obama himself ever had. The breakdown wasn't emotional, it was intellectual, and that made it far more devastating than any political defeat he had previously experienced. What we witnessed on that leaked footage was nothing less than the intellectual humbling of a man who had spent decades believing his own mythology. Obama had convinced himself that his policies were too sophisticated, too morally necessary, too constitutionally sound to be easily reversed. But Trump proved that constitutional authority, properly understood and properly wielded, can undo anything that constitutional authority, improperly applied, had created. And in those final moments of the footage, you could see Obama finally understanding something that his Harvard professors had never taught him. In American government, cleverness is no substitute for legitimacy, and academic credentials are no protection against constitutional reality. The student had become the teacher, and the lesson was devastating in its simplicity.
This is how Vision MD was born. I'm Dr. Zhu. I'm a Harvard trained eye doctor and surgeon.